What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blurred Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video, since we got Black Panther Wakanda Forever coming up, and we're gonna be seeing Black Panther taking on Namor the Submariner, let's talk a little bit about the history between the King of Atlantis and the King of Wakanda, and why these two characters are always at each other's throats.
Can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
So to get into this, we have to address the fact that Namor and T'Challa have a long history with one another. A history that ranges all the way back to their time serving as members of the Defenders and the Avengers together. As well as Namor not just being an enemy and ally of T'Challa, but also T'Challa's grandfather, Azuri, a former Black Panther himself, as well as the ruler of Wakanda during World War II. And while yes, the MCU version of Namor and the Atlanteans are not exactly the same, there are a lot of similarities, and I feel like these comics we're going to be talking about can really help a lot of people understand why these two kingdoms are at war. The true beginnings of the conflict between Wakanda and Atlantis didn't necessarily begin with AVX. It began in 2018's Rise of the Black Panther #2, a part of a prequel series that depicts T'Challa's earliest days as King of Wakanda. Here, T'Challa was investigating the disappearance of Wakandans, while Namor was searching for traitors to his kingdom of Atlantis. They had the typical superhero misunderstanding that always leads to a superhero throwdown, but as they typically do, they soon learned they were on the same side. More or less. This didn't stop T'Challa from recognizing Namor as a whole problem. A man that powerful, ruling a kingdom that is Wakandans' equal but underwater. Of course this guy kept a folder of him on his Google Drive. Chronologically, that was their first encounter, but we're talking publication-wise. They actually had an encounter, a first encounter that took place before this. This would actually happen 40 years prior in Defenders number 84 in 1980, when Namor sent Atlanteans out into the world to protect Atlantean interest. Namor's subjects seemingly misread him and attempted to steal technology from Wakanda, and rather aggressively. This led to less of a fight and more of a debate about how those Atlanteans should have been punished, but even more so, who would punish them. This would lead Wakanda and Atlantis into a near nuclear war, as Wakanda, without T'Challa's say-so, launched a nuke at Atlantis because they saw the Hulk launching himself from Atlantis' depths on their radar, recognizing his radiation signature and assuming it was a nuclear strike from the underwater kingdom. So they launched one of their own as retaliation. Fortunately, both Namor and T'Challa recognized quickly enough that open war between their two peoples would benefit neither of them, and they were able to work together to stop the missile from striking Atlantis, and instead redirected it to Kyber Island instead, an island protectorate of Wakanda that T'Challa was more than willing to sacrifice to make amends to the Kingdom of Atlantis. T'Challa and Namor would go on to maintain a somewhat friendly working relationship going forward, serving on both the Avengers and Defenders together, as I mentioned earlier. They'd have another scuffle between their two nations, but one that was built on the back of yet another misunderstanding, where both Atlantis and Wakanda, who had otherwise been very peaceful with each other since that incident during Defenders number 84, Wakanda was tricked into firing on Atlantis because they believed Atlantis was preparing to attack Wakanda, turning what was already a very tenuous alliance into something that was well beyond its breaking point, forcing Wakanda and Atlantis into a position where neither would trust the other. But it was actually the White Wolf and Ulysses Claw in tandem with the Deviants playing both sides against the middle to get Atlantis to believe that Wakanda wanted to go to war with them, and vice versa, turning two of the world's biggest superpowers against one another and watching both of them crumble as a result of it. This incident occurred over the course of Christopher Priest Black Panther number 26 through 29 in 2001. And it was actually during this time that the X-Men's Magneto would come along in ways that only Michael Jackson could do in the music video for Beat It, stepped in between both Namor and T'Challa and kept them both from killing each other. Now, they didn't do any fancy gangster dance moves afterward, but this did end up leading to T'Challa and Namor dropping their hostilities with one another and becoming allies once more. All the while, Namor remained an ally to Black Panther more consistently than he was to most people, even being invited to T'Challa's bachelor party ahead of his marrying Storm, and was also invited to the wedding itself. They even tried to work together to prepare both their kingdoms as well as the rest of the world for the fallout between Captain America and Iron Man during Civil War, with Namor even asking T'Challa to be the one to lead the world in an effort to stop any negative fallout from that Civil War event. However, that friendship quickly deteriorated during 2012's Avengers vs. X-Men crossover. During that time, the Avengers learned the Phoenix Force was returning to Earth and was seeking Hope Summers as a host, and Cable had returned from the future to warn the X-Men the Avengers were going to kill Hope Summers as what was happening in his timeline. This led both teams into conflict, which drug Namor and T'Challa into it as well, since Namor had recently aligned himself with the X-Men, and T'Challa, despite his wife Storm being a mutant, sided with the Avengers. In Avengers vs. X-Men number 7 and 8, after Namor had already gained 1/5 of the Phoenix Force, becoming one of the Phoenix Five, in an attempt to destroy the Avengers once and for all, who at the time were hiding out in Wakanda from the Phoenix Five, Namor went there against Cyclops' wishes and unleashed the full might of his power, sending a massive tidal wave that drowned much of Wakanda and killed millions of innocent people. You'd think this would make Namor and T'Challa bitter enemies for the rest of eternity. But eventually, fate would actually lead both characters to having to grudgingly work together. And while I say grudgingly, even on a somewhat friendly basis, I mean as friendly as two people can be when they've been at war with one another and one side killed millions of the other person's people. This all took place during 2015's Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers series, though admittedly more on the New Avengers side than anything else, because that was when the Illuminati was formed once again. The two would be a part of this new Illuminati alongside Reed Richards, Beast, Doctor Strange, Iron Man, and Black Bolt to try to stop the incursions that would eventually lead to 2015's Secret Wars event. All would be fine until Namor, in an act of aggression, destroyed an inhabited alternate Earth to save Earth 616, the primary Earth in the Marvel Comics universe, if you are unfamiliar. Technically, this wasn't the worst thing. T'Challa's own ancestors, former Black Panthers themselves, even one of them being T'Challa's father, T'Chaka, they all agreed that, yeah, this should happen. This should be done. But where things got heated is that the ancestors also felt that T'Challa should put the blade where it belongs, in Namor's heart, as restitution for all of the Wakandans that Namor had killed. And they consistently berated T'Challa for treating with what they felt was the enemy to their people, even if it was to save the world. Namor would later reveal he'd sent Thanos and his Black Order to Wakanda in search of the Infinity Stones that were not there to spare Atlantis from being completely destroyed during the events of Infinity. Though this lie wasn't without a bit of merit. While secretly working with T'Challa on stopping the incursions, Shuri went to Atlantis and wiped it off the map as revenge for what Namor did during AVX. And while T'Challa had no active part in this, he knew that it was going to happen, and he seemingly regretted that it had to happen. This continued the cycle of violence between the two nations rather than breaking it. This led them into being bitter foes once again. This would actually lead to Black Panther putting the blade where it belonged, in Namor's heart. Not only that, but he would also have Black Bolt speak in Namor's direction, knocking him off the ship that all three of them were on, sending Namor plummeting down to a planet that the Illuminati had already plotted to destroy in order to stop the incursions, and T'Challa detonated that planet with Namor still on it. Now, granted, Namor would not die from this because we would later see him return in Secret Wars, but still, if T'Challa didn't send the message, I don't know what else would. What makes this even more heartbreaking, though, is that shortly before this, in New Avengers number 17, Black Panther and Namor were actually starting to get along. They were actually beginning to put the bad blood behind them. They were laughing together, sharing a drink, and it was almost as if it was back to the Reggie Hudlin days when Namor and T'Challa were as thick as thieves. But getting back to the long-standing feud between Namor and T'Challa, reluctantly, they would both have to work together during 2015's Secret Wars in an effort to secure the Infinity Gauntlet and all its Infinity Stones to distract God Doom long enough that Reed Richards could fix reality and return the multiverse back to normal after Dr. Doom twisted it into his own perfect singular reality at the peril of everyone else. This moment was pivotal because not only did T'Challa use this moment to set up Ta-Nehisi Coates' intergalactic empire of Wakanda in 2018, but it also showed that Namor respected T'Challa, telling him to wield the power of the Infinity Stones rather than just use it himself, because Namor, having self-awareness, knew that he could not be trusted, not with that much power. And it's something we've actually seen happen in comics even after this, when he's wielded the Phoenix Force once again during Jason Aaron's Avengers. He lost his whole damn mind. Since then, both nations have largely been at a ceasefire with one another. Now, Namor isn't getting invited to any cookouts anytime soon, but for the most part, Atlantis and Wakanda have given each other a very wide berth. And while a lot of what I've just recently said will have you believe that Wakanda and Atlantis are the most bitter of enemies at worst, or rivals at best, there are potential futures where Wakanda and Atlantis are very much allies. Potential futures where T'Challa and Namor even become family, with their children marrying one another, bridging the gap between Atlantis and Wakanda, and there's even been mention over the years that the two kingdoms have a long history with one another, long before either of these two heroes had ever met, maybe even much less been born. T'Challa once stated that Atlantis and Wakanda share very similar architecture, leading him to believe maybe the two people were once closely aligned, perhaps even one singular society. All that aside, will we see any of this in Black Panther, Wakanda Forever? I don't know, I don't think we will, but there's also a lot of stuff from these comics that Marvel can pull from to place in the MCU, and even a lot of things I feel could set up a lot of cool story arcs down the road regarding Namor the Submariner. And I will definitely say that there are also some things we see happen in the trailer for Black Panther Wakanda Forever that seem like callbacks to events like AVX. There are scenes in the movie where we see people being drowned, we see Wakanda being flooded, and this all very much smacks of Avengers vs. X-Men number 7 and 8, where Namor did exactly the same thing. Only I'm gonna imagine he doesn't have the Phoenix Force in this movie. So if you were curious about why and how Wakanda and Atlantis, Namor, T'Challa, why they always seem to be at each other's throats, that is the reason why. But in the meantime, let me know what you think about the rivalry between T'Challa, the Black Panther, and Namor, the Submariner. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.